Hi friends, and welcome to Teacher Therapy. Thank you all for your patience and waiting for me to do another video. I have read literally thousands of your comments, and I am so appreciative of how you guys have shared your life and your experiences with me and with each other, and I've loved every minute of it. I did notice, however, that one particular video generated a little bit of drama in the comment section, and that's my video on Gen Z. So I almost want to make a part 2 to that and really talk more about that because so many interesting points were brought up, and I want to continue the conversation. Seemingly the most controversial part about the video was my emphasis on Gen Z not respecting authority. And I think people kind of got an image in their head of me being a drill sergeant or a boot camp instructor, or perhaps even a dictator of a small country. But the truth is, I was one of the nicest teachers that I knew, and I've always genuinely been a nice person. So it was never an issue of me being mean or wanting unreasonable things. But I found that almost any and every rule or procedure or standard that I set, 80 to 90% of my students would somehow completely disregard it or fail to follow through with it. And I truly got tired of it. So let's talk about why a basic respect for authority is necessary for society to function. I want you to imagine that you are in an airplane, but nobody respects rules or authority. So we've got some passengers that are trying to fly the plane. We've got other passengers that are maybe not quite so bold, but they're jumping up out of their seat and they're running to the refrigerator and getting their food because they don't want to wait for the stewardess. Let's say that there's a few people that don't really find the stewardess's safety conversation very important, so they're loudly singing while she's trying to go over the procedures. Let's pretend that at the checkout counter, when it's time to purchase tickets, every maybe third customer is arguing about the price of tickets. They want to negotiate them and they don't think it's fair, and they want to tell the counter attendant why they should have a special exception for the price. And I think you know where we're going with this, right? In society, and especially in a classroom environment where there might be over 30 students, there has to be some kind of order, rule, and structure, and the teacher is responsible for setting those rules and enforcing those rules. When students inherently don't have any kind of respect for rules or authority, we have the situation in a lot of modern classes today. Teachers can't get through their lesson because students are constantly interrupting. Teachers are having to waste time over classroom procedures because even though they've been taught dozens of times, students are refusing to follow through with them. Students aren't listening when the teacher is talking, so then they have no idea what they're supposed to be doing by the time the assignment comes. Just like in the airplane analogy, maybe most of the things that people are doing are relatively small, but collectively that really impacts the classroom environment. But then you have students that are the equivalent of the passenger that's trying to fly and take over the plane and they don't know what they're doing. All it takes is 1 to 3 students to completely disrupt, if not destroy, a classroom environment. And that's really what I was talking about when it came to students not respecting authority, rules, or procedures. With most teachers that I know, they're not so much interested in just having unquestioned dominance over a classroom, but it's the really simple, basic things that can completely wear out a teacher. Now, people that are not familiar with how modern schools work will just say, well, that student should just get in trouble. But that's the problem. In modern education, there really is no way for students to get in trouble for the most part. There's been these kind of wacky Pollyanna discipline theories that really kind of have gotten rid of things like detention or suspension or even missing recess or anything that people used to do in the past to kind of be a deterrent to bad behavior. So students are really in a position where they really don't have any kind of consequences that are impeding their desire to do whatever they want. Other people would say, well, why don't you just let that student fail if they're not interested in learning? But in modern education, teachers actually get in trouble when students fail. And that, I would say, is one of the biggest differences between modern education and past education. Even when I was going to school, if I didn't study for a test, my teacher wasn't in trouble. The grade and the content was my responsibility to learn, whether or not I I felt like the teacher instructed in a way that I preferred. However, these days, literally everything is blamed on teachers. We're responsible for students' test scores, even if they have chosen not to study. We get in trouble and reprimanded if we are sending students to the office. And there's even another layer of feeling like we're in trouble when we're trying to contact students' parents, because these days, a lot of times, the parents will actually get mad at us and try to argue and fight with us and try to go above our heads and make our job in jeopardy for having complaints about their students. And these are all the reasons that I eventually ended up quitting after 8 years of teaching. Even though I truly did love my students, I mean truly, I felt like I was in such a weird role that made it literally impossible for me to do my job. There was also a huge difference in my values and the students' values, especially related to education. Now, this definitely differed from school to school, but in many of the schools that I worked at, I found out that my students really didn't value my subject at all. I taught English, ELA, English Language Arts, and it was often one of the least favorite subjects of my students. And so I found that often they just would not do the work. The crazy part is that a lot of my school districts made it impossible for a student to fail. So even with things like doing projects, homework, assignments, there was absolutely no incentive unless a student already had it internally for them to actually complete their assignments. And that only got 500 times worse from 2020 through this year. The year that I quit, 2021, we had a hybrid model going, meaning some students were at home learning via Zoom and some students were in school. And I found that it didn't matter which was which, they just flat out weren't doing their work at all. I'm talking at least 90% of my students were doing absolutely nothing. They weren't even logging in to the platforms where the work was. When I had them in class and I even gave them time on their assignments, I would catch them all the time playing games on the iPads, having conversations with each other in Google Docs, having their own Zoom meetings with their friends, and many other crazy things. So I really felt like it left me in a no-win situation. If there was misbehavior, there was really nothing that I could do to stop it. If students were not doing their homework or assignments, they had really no incentive to do anything different. I tried to remedy this by buying probably hundreds of dollars of candy over my time as a teacher, because I tried to tap into whatever motivation I could find. And sometime it kind of worked, but it had a backfire effect where anytime I wanted students to do something, their first question would be, will we get candy, or how much candy will we get? Some teachers got into a position where they felt the only way that they could run their classrooms was through having more of an intimidating presence, but that's just not something that I've naturally ever possessed. So I really did try everything possible. I tried to work with all of my natural talents. I tried to be entertaining and energetic and funny and kind and build relationships and do all the things that they say that you're supposed to do. Except sometimes I felt like the kinder I was, the worse my students treated me and the more they disrespected me. And even though I don't agree with it, I think that's why many teachers end up having more of an intimidating persona, because they see that it's the only thing that they find effective. They don't want to have to be me buying hundreds of dollars worth of candy and feeling like they're practically having to put on a show in order to get students to do anything at all. And of course, there were the normal classroom problems that really probably has been happening since the 50s. Yes, kids want to talk all the time. They never want to stop talking. Anytime that they're supposed to be quiet, they want to be talking. Sure, that's understandable, but I think in the past, schools and parents and even society supported teachers more in reinforcing what was acceptable behavior. So even though kids may not have changed in some of their core ways of misbehaving, our current educational system actually empowers misbehavior. And I really did try everything. I tried to do a lot more cooperative learning where students were working in partners and in groups. And maybe the students did have a bit more fun, but that still didn't really really help my ultimate aim, which was getting students to truly think critically, to be excellent readers and writers and speakers. Them talking in partners and having fun, shiny computer programs might seem on the surface to make them more engaged in their learning, but it's not completing the learning objectives that they need. And there was a huge disconnect between the incredibly hard standardized test, benchmark test that we were supposed to give them that had gigantic reading passages that were really challenging, and what I was expected to basically have them do in class, which was supposed to be lots of fun and quote unquote engaging, but the tests weren't fun or engaging or light or easy. So there was just all of these perplexing situations that were constantly colliding in my mind, and it was truly exhausting. As a teacher, support is absolutely everything. I think teachers can put up with a lot when they feel like their administrators have their back, when they feel like the parents of the students have their back, and when as a whole they feel like society appreciates and understands what they're trying to do. But in this particular climate, all of those things have been turned on their head. And in the last 2 years, a lot of this has come to the surface more than ever. That is not to mention the influence of social media on students today, and even things like the phenomenon of Fortnite. I can't tell you how much I had kids talking about Fortnite and how they were up to 2 and 3 in the morning, yet they couldn't be bothered to log into their assignment and complete any of their homework. And again, this constantly goes back to the conversation of values. My students valued Fortnite and they valued TikTok. So they would spend hours and hours and hours, focused hours, mind you, learning all about Fortnite and excelling in that. They might spend hours and hours and hours learning different dances and editing TikTok videos because that is what they valued. But they wouldn't even spend 10 minutes on my reading programs where I could literally log in and see what they did. They wouldn't even do it. And there was nothing I could do about that, yet I was in trouble for it. So the whole situation was just crazy making. And of course, there were more severe problems. I have had students that would like throw desks and yell and scream and have meltdowns and rip apart bulletin boards. I've had students call me cuss words to my face. I've intercepted notes written about me. And as I've mentioned in other videos, I've even had students make horrible memes about me and spread them all among their friends. I've had kids like videotape me and upload it places that they shouldn't. There's all of those horrible things, but surprisingly enough, it actually wasn't that stuff that wore me down the most. It was just the daily disregard for what I was trying to do for them as a teacher, which was teach them, help them to have character, and help them to be functioning citizens of society one day. But it just felt like no matter what I did, it felt like I wasn't getting through. Overall, I've found that this current generation, and I'm sure that this was a problem before, but especially this generation, has no tolerance for boredom. They have no tolerance for anything that seems to be a little bit uncomfortable. And the truth is, in college, they are going to have to master very difficult textbooks, lots of work, lots of focus and concentration, and they're going to have to learn how to be adaptable. And that is something that was so missing among my students. They didn't know how to adapt from environment to environment, from teacher to teacher. Instead, they wanted to be able to come in and set my rules and set my expectations, and they wanted to be able to decide which assignments they shouldn't do. And again, the educational system is working more and more towards facilitating that. I had, different instructional coaches and professional developments talk about how students should have full choice in what they want their assignments to do or what they want their assignments to be. And with more of the standards-based grading approach, the idea was that there should be no hard deadlines. Students should be able to infinitely turn in something until they got the grade that they wanted, or until they so-called mastered the standards. What that really amounted to was I set a deadline for something, almost nobody turns it in, and I'm expected to just kind of deal with it. So at the end of the day, I think this whole topic goes back to how we're doing as a society. society. I think overall, when people's heroes are like the Kardashians or Cardi B or whoever, whoever people are looking up to these days, that's going to be conflicting with a lot of the values that I hoped to impart to my students, which was ethical behavior, kindness, respect, hard work, grit, and determination, all of those things. But it was as if I was speaking a totally different language. And it truly took all of my energy, all of the time, just to keep things flowing. And it was really starting to wear me down. I felt like I had to put on a show of just so much energy and enthusiasm and happiness and positivity, and nobody ever wanted to be told that they were doing the wrong thing. Anytime I would dare try to enforce any rules, I knew I was going to get a ton of attitude back from students. And again, it was over the most simple things. A quick example was when we were in the building, we had these stickers that were on the wall so that students could be the appropriate distance from each other. And literally every single day, every single class period, because I was teaching middle school, we had to come out into the hallways and tell the students to stand where they were supposed to be standing with giant colorful stickers on the wall. And it was things like that, just things that are exhausting, knowing that even though they know the expectations, they've been explained like why we had those expectations. We couldn't have made it clearer. It wasn't an issue of us just wanting to be authoritarian. For one, that was a school-wide and districting that was happening. But for two, it was just something very simple that we asked them to do, but they just outright refused to do it. When I was teaching on Zoom, we had a list of some really simple rules. We asked them not to be eating on camera. We asked them not to be in the Zoom classroom laying in bed. We asked them just kind of simple things like raise your hand to unmute yourself and get permission to talk. Initially, we had the rule that their cameras needed to be on so that they could get credit for class and so that we would know who was in the Zoom rooms to keep everybody safe. But eventually the school just backed off on that. So many parents complained about it. And that was just another thing. We were constantly given rules that we were supposed to enforce, but yet anytime there was pushback from parents, the schools would kind of just collapse those rules. And so teachers were constantly the ones that looked like a joke. At the end of the day, I think that we're kind of breeding a narcissistic culture, and instead of schools and society and parents going against the grain of that, they're really facilitating, feeding, and empowering those mindsets. People just want what's good for them or what they like without any respect of wondering what's good for everyone. And I ultimately just couldn't see any kind of way around it. I felt like at any given time, I was trying to constantly hold multiple beach balls underwater and doing everything I could to keep them from all popping out again. And I got tired of it. And that's not at all even to mention just the mountains of paperwork, the zillions of meetings, some of the crazy observation practices. This is just talking kind of about dealing with students and their families in relation to school rules and procedures. I also got really worn out by the horrible attitude that my students had constantly, no matter how fun that I tried to make things, no matter how much I tried to meet them where they were, I just constantly never really felt like they were meeting me where I was. I felt like I was kind of giving my best, which is 80% on any given day, but I felt like they were barely giving me 20%. So I felt like I was trying to do my job and their job. And I gotta say, even their parents' job. The more I noticed over the years, our professional development started changing, where we were supposed to be teaching kids more and more things that normally a parent would teach, like basic life skills, basic emotional management, basic conflict resolution, the kind of things that by 6th grade a kid should be coming to school with. They weren't. And so we were expected to essentially almost behave as if we were each kid's counselor. And it was just impossible when you have over 100 students. As much as we want to do those kind of things, is absolutely wearing so many of us out. I've seen teachers under tables crying, no joke, the last couple of years, because the standards that were put on teachers just keep getting higher, and the standards that the students were expected to do just kept getting lower. And yet everybody was not sure why my test scores weren't what they were hoping that they would be. Every day really felt like trying to push a giant boulder up the hill with no help. But you know, if you stop pushing, that boulder's going to fall back and run you over. That's how I felt all the time teaching. And ultimately, I kind of felt like my job was just a sham. I felt like a glorified babysitter that was supposed to provide educationally themed entertainment. And if a kid gets to choose between Fortnite and TikTok, I don't care how fun you make conjunctions and adverbs, that's just not going to be able to compete. And truth be told, it shouldn't have to. To me, it's a lot like the concept of healthy eating. Broccoli shouldn't really have to compare with chocolate cake, but broccoli is good for you. And if you eat broccoli, you're going to have a lot more health than if all you do is eat chocolate cake. But at my school and in the districts that I've been at, I felt like they were constantly trying to get us to turn broccoli into chocolate cake instead of teaching kids the value of broccoli over chocolate cake. So to kind of answer some of the questions that came up in other videos, I absolutely did love my students no matter how obnoxiously they behaved. I wasn't trying to be an authoritarian nightmare for students. I just wanted them to do basic things like not talk when they weren't supposed to, listen, cooperate with each other, follow basic directions, whether they were school rules or classroom rules. And my objective was never to create drones that just unquestioningly follow commands. I actually really focused a lot on critical thinking skills, debate, persuasion, all of the things that you would hope that a student would get at school. But too often, I just noticed that in this modern time, people think in such extremes that they think it's impossible to facilitate critical thinking while also teaching kids to be respectful of their teachers and their principals, to be respectful of rules when they're not at home. People set those two things in opposition as if they can't both exist at the same time. But my belief, and it hasn't changed, is that they must both exist at the same time, or else you have a society that's collapsing, which I think most of us can agree that's kind of what's been happening over the last few years. And at the end of the day, I didn't want to be a part of that. No amount of money was worth that to me, because I ultimately felt like now I was taking place in a system that ultimately wasn't good for students. And that is why I quit teaching. So please let me know, what do you think in the comments? Let me know if you have any video ideas that you want me to do. I am really, truly this time planning to get back into making videos. So let me know what you guys think. And thank you all so much for those of you that have subscribed. Love you guys and have a great day.